Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the XM4. Obviously, I put out a video explaining the top 10 loadouts currently within Warzone, but there was a lot of debate about why didn't you include this class setup? Why didn't you include this class setup? In a top 10 loadout video, you can only have 10 loadouts, and I want to try to incorporate as many weapons as possible, especially with so many weapons being viable within the meta, being very usable. Obviously, once the MG82 gets a little bit of a nerf, everything kind of has a really strong balance for long range. We also have a ton of sniper support options, and we also have a ton of options at the SMG shotgun range or rifles that can be used as SMG. So that's what we're going to talk about today when it comes to the XM4, which currently I think is the most versatile gun in all of Warzone right now, because it can be used as an SMG, it can be used as sniper support, and it can also be used at long range if you stack it appropriately. If you enjoy the video, learn something new, please do me a favor, hit the like button. If you're brand new, want to find your way back, double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Let's go ahead and get into it. So what we have here on the left side of the screen is the overall stats for the XM4 when it comes to the SMG category. I decided to include a couple other SMGs along with it to kind of see how it stacks up against the competition. In this particular case, we have the MAC-10, PPSH, and the Cold War MP5. You could have the Modern Warfare 1, the LC-10. There's a ton of other weapons I could have. I just chose a couple that are kind of in the mix. When it comes to the fire rate, it's going to be the least forgiving. As you can see, it has 721 RPM, and the higher that RPM, obviously that's the faster the bullets come out, but that's also the time between shots is smaller, so significantly more forgiving. Anything over about 650 to 700, that's kind of in the meta. For the longest, the AMAX has been meta and it's 630, but up close, if you're missing shots, your TTK rises up. So fire rate's well within reason. Aim down sight speed, when you build it like an SMG, you get it right around the range as well, 230, which is kind of tied there with the Modern Warfare or Cold War MP5, as you can see on the right. And then we also have the MAC-10 and PPSH, which come in significantly faster. They are some of the fastest aiming down sight guns that are fully stacked in the entire game, and you can stack them even faster, just a little bit less practical because you want a little bit of range. Maybe you want suppression. So there's other factors that go into it. As we go down, you can see the sprint to fire time way faster on a gun like the PPSH. No longer has an open bolt delay. You can see the tactical sprint to fire way faster on the SMGs, but those are just kind of inherently with the SMG class. They just tend to be faster than rifles. Rifles tend to be about the same or faster than LMGs, which tend to be faster than the sniper rifles or so on. And shotguns are usually right around the SMG range as well. As far as movement speed, it is the slowest from the bunch, but it's not a huge difference. It's essentially the difference between the MAC-10 and the Cold War MP5. That difference there, so it still has incredibly good mobility. Strafe speed, it's pretty much tied with the PPSH and a little bit faster than the Cold War MP5 with this particular build. Hip fire spread, obviously with the SMGs, they're already built way tighter, so you can kind of see how that particular part works. When it comes to bullet velocity, it's there competitive, but bullet velocity is not all that important at the very close range. Obviously, the Cold War MP5 suffers from having the slowest one, but most of your engagements with that are supposed to be around 10 meters. The other ones do have a little bit more versatility, up to about 15, 20 meters. And then the XM4, you could really challenge people 30, 40 meters. You put on an optic, as we'll see when you go into the other builds that we're going to talk about, you get tons of versatility with this individual weapon. 45 round mag versus the other ones, you could put around 50. You can go at 60 round mag, but then it ends up being a little bit too slow. So that's kind of where the trade-off and why so many people are going to use a 45 round mag over the 60 for the SMG build, because you need to compete with these SMG values that we're seeing for aim down sight, as well as some movement speed things. Now we can take a look at how they compare head to head in terms of time to kill. You can see that the Modern Warfare, or the Cold War, I keep saying that, but Cold War MP5, it has a class setup that I would recommend for this particular build. There are some things you could swap out. It just depends. Right here, you can see you're getting a very fast time to kill at sub 500 milliseconds, and that is one of the fastest in the game, minus shotguns and one-shot snipers. Then when we go a little bit higher, the PPSH comes in very good here. I'm surprised it's still underrated because of where it sits. It's actually very competitive with this basic TTK. And then you can see the XM4 actually comes in slightly below the MAC-10. The difference is with the MAC-10, it does have a slight open bolt delay, which pushes that up. But if you're continually firing or you pre-fire an enemy as they come around the corner, the TTK will drop by 50, and then the XM4 TTK will be slightly slower than the Mac 10. But you can see it's relatively close there. And that's kind of how that part compares. Now let's talk about sniper support. So XM4 sniper support, you can see how it's going to compare on the left-hand side with the RAM AK-47 Cold War version, and then the FARA. In terms of fire rate, it's kind of in the mix there. Obviously, AK has a much slower one. FARA is a little bit faster than the XM4, but they're still pretty reasonable. And then the RAM 7 has a very fast one at over 850 RPM. Then we go towards the aim down sight. You can see that they're relatively close. And then when it comes to the aim down sight, you can see that the XM4 actually wins in this category just because it's inherently faster than these other weapons that we're looking at. We have the RAM 7, which is still pretty reasonable at 300. Obviously, you're not going to get the SMG type or level aim down sight, but it's still pretty close. And then obviously the AK and the FARA a little bit slower from the get-go. So when you stack it with the similar build as the XM4, it ends up being a little bit slower overall, but it's still within reason where you're going to be able to have very good sniper support options. And this is for close to medium, and you're using like the Car 98 or a Swiss or HDR or one of the other snipers that's usable right now as your long range option. And then we go down to movement speed. You can see that the movement speed on the XM4 and the AK-47 pretty much even. The RAM is the slowest, which can hurt you just for mobility, because that is your mobility weapon in this case if you're using a sniper rifle. And then we have the ADS movement, and you can see the FARA by far has the fastest strafing speed, and that's kind of where it excels, but it doesn't make up for it with its slower aim down sight. So it's kind of one of those things you got to deal with, but it is a huge pro of the FARA. That's just a side note. But the XM4 still pretty reasonable. We just don't have all the mobility attachments that we had initially because we need a little bit more range on this thing. We need a little bit more visibility, so we put on an optic, and that kind of ends up working things out that way. Hipfire, you can see that the RAM actually has the best hipfire out of this, but this, you're generally not going to hipfire as much. It's more for the pre-aiming, because if you're focusing on hipfire, by the time you aim down sight, a lot of those SMGs are going to close the distance, get a few shots off. You're going to lose those gunfights. So you got to learn and know how to play with a rifle as a sniper support, which does a little bit up close and a little bit at that medium range. Then when it comes to the bullet velocity, you can see that they're all pretty even except for the FARA. I ended up putting on the other barrel because what ended up happening is it ended up being a little bit too slow, but I still wanted a little bit of the range. You can offset this by putting on the Ranger barrel equivalent, and you can get that max bullet velocity, and you will get slightly better aim down sight. But since it's a sniper support, you're not going to be able to get that range that you're getting from one of the other attachments. So it's just a couple different trade-offs there. With the FARA, kind of, it depends on how you build it. You can make it equal it, but you can see very comparable with the XM4 while still having a decent aim down sight time. Now we'll go ahead and compare the sniper support builds, and you can kind of see how they lay out. The AK-47's theoretical TTK is very good, and that's primarily because it does a lot of damage and has a slow fire rate. So the odds of you hitting this is it's less practical because of slower fire rate. But if you do, this thing is deleting people. And then it has a drop off, and then it goes further around, all the way up around 600 milliseconds. And that goes beyond that 30-ish meters. Then we have the RAM, which does very well. Has a little bit more of a kind of an off-putting recoil pattern for a lot of people up and to the left. And then it also has a smaller mag compared to a lot of these options where you're going to be running a 60 round mag. For the extra distance, you're going to be lining up the shots. If you want to run a 45, you can get a little bit faster aim down sight, but there's going to be situations where you definitely need those bullets. And I think for a range weapon, 60 is the way you kind of got to go, and that's a little bit where the RAM 7 suffers. So if we kind of look at that, then the next one up is the XM4, which does very well, and then the FARA, as you can see, kind of where its drop-offs are. By the time it's all said and done, the AK comes out, number one in terms of TTK at range. That's because it's generally harder to use. But if you combine all these ones, they're very close together. This is within like 30 milliseconds, so 2 frames difference. It's just a matter of what you prefer. And XM4 fits into that category quite well. And that's going to bring us to the long range options. You can see we're comparing the XM4 to the AMAX, the FARA, and the Krig. Obviously, you can put the brand new CR in there. I just wanted to grab a couple popular options. I know a lot of people haven't unlocked and leveled up yet. The CR, the C58 or whatever it's called, is a very good weapon. It's just a matter of having that slow rate of fire. It can be very punishing for especially a little bit average to below average players. So I want to include the most popular, most likely weapons to use once that LMG is gone. But we're comparing the XM4 for long range options. You can see in terms of fire rate, it's on point. The AMAX was slower. The Krig is slow as well. And this one comes out about 10% faster than both of those options. And the FARA is another 10% faster than that. So this one ends up being a little bit more forgiving when it comes to the FARA because it has that faster fire rate. When it comes to aim down sight speed, you can see they're all relatively close. You can see that the FARA comes in a little bit slower. The Krig comes in a little bit slower than the XM4, but the XM4 and the AMAX are tied. So even with this particular build that we're going to talk about today, even though it may feel slow initially, keep in mind that the aim down sight is basically the same as the AMAX, which everyone's been using for the past 3 or 4 months, way longer than that, but at least that's been the solid, consistent meta after the Kilo nerfs. The DMR was in the mix, but overall, the AMAX has been tried and true. Aim down sight hasn't changed. And then we also have the movement speed. You're going to get better mobility. You have the Cold War guns. Obviously, the Krig has a little bit more mobility. And then the AMAX is very slow. So this is an advantage from these weapons, even though you're going to be running with the secondary, which is likely another SMG. And then we also have the ADS movement speed. Strafe speed is incredibly important, even at range, because it just allows you to make yourself a little bit harder target to hit, especially when people got to go like this. It makes it a little bit trickier than just control your recoil vertically. And then we also have the hipfire spread. The AMAX comes out the worst. All the Cold War weapons are pretty much tied. Bullet velocity, they're all about even because the attachments essentially do the same thing. They start at the same place. AMAX actually has slower bullet velocity than all of these other 3 options. And then when it comes to mag size, all of these have a bigger mag because obviously they do slightly less damage than the AMAX. So there is that trade-off. So you can see how the XM4 has fit into the SMG, sniper support, and long-range meta. Now let's talk a little bit about long-range TTK for these weapons as well. So pretty much what we're looking at here, as you can see, the specific attachments I'm using for that XM4, as well as the AMAX, the FARA, the Krig. And for the numbers that I had on screen, I actually adjusted those to fit those extra attachments so they would be accurate based off the aim down sight, because they are not currently on true game data. So I had to incorporate those in myself, so you guys had a better comparison there, at least until that's updated on the site. What you can see here is that the Krig performs terrible compared to these other ones. There's a much bigger gap than we saw with some of the previous examples. And at range, this could matter less, because if you're more accurate, then you get much closer to this number. And if somebody misses a ton of shots with this one, it can end up equaling this. So you kind of end up depending on your skill level. But with a lot of the changes, I think the FARA is very easy to use. You can see that, how it performs as a long range option. I think the XM4 is slightly harder to use, but so negligible. Comes down to a matter of preference, recoil patterns, aim down sight speed, mobility, how the gun feels, looks, sounds. Those are the parts where you're kind of getting into it. Then you have the XM4, which is coming in at the orange one, and it's essentially tied with the AMAX at range after that nerf. So as long as you're able to hit the shots, you can still get some pretty fast times to kill, and it's significantly easier to use. And this is kind of why it's phasing out the AMAX in general. Not that it's unusable to use the AMAX, but because of that closeness, you might as well go with the gun that's a little bit easier to use, has more ammo, a little bit more forgiving, better aim down sight, or tied in this particular case, the way you're building it. And then you kind of have the options, 3 different solid options here for range, at least for these ones that we talked about. And then the Krig is for individuals that struggle a little bit more recoil with all of these. But you can see how the XM4 definitely has that competitive time to kill, even though it has a drop off significantly earlier than a lot of these weapons. So this is the first SMG build for the XM4. We're using the agency suppressor for the bullet velocity, range, those types of things. Even though it hurts your aim down sight slightly, I think it does definitely help out that range. You can go with the regular suppressor if you want to get a little bit faster. If you feel like you're losing too many gunfights to those SMGs, you can go that route, but this is the standard route that most people will go. Tiger Team for the mobility, extra strafe speed. For the Raider stock, you're getting better strafe speed, but you're also getting the better sprint to fire time. So you have those benefits there. And then the airborne elastic wrap is just for a faster aim down sight. You could always swap this out, maybe get rid of the airborne, go the regular suppressor, and then maybe put on the bruiser, which is going to also give you some of the other benefits, and you get even more mobility. But this is the general build I would have for the SMG version with the 45 round mag. Now let's go ahead and go into the sniper support option. So for the sniper support, you run the suppressor so you get a little bit faster aim down sight, because we're going to be running the task force, which is going to help with the range and bullet velocity. And then we're going to run with the microflex LED, since you're going to be challenging targets just a little bit further. You want as clean as optic as possible compared to the iron sights, where it can get a little tricky once players get a little bit further outside of that range. You can go with the 45 round mag if you're playing solos, maybe duos. If you're playing trios and quads, you're definitely going to want to go with the 60 round mag. And then we'll run that airborne elastic. You could actually get rid of the airborne elastic if you're going with the 45 round, because that'll speed you up a little bit. And then maybe you put on the Tiger team, you could put on the actual bruiser, you could put on the Raider stock, which has huge benefits. And then you would go that way, so you have a little bit better strafe speed. And that's kind of how you would build the weapon. If maybe you didn't want task force because it felt like it slowed you down too much, you could actually go with this reinforced heavy, which is kind of halfway between that and the ranger. It's still going to give you a little bit better range, because obviously some of the engagements will be closer. Those extra range will actually shave off a couple shots to kill, or keep it at that shorter shots to kill, but a little bit further. So it really just depends on your overall preference. So you kind of have a couple different options, and that's what's so great about this gun and a lot of the Cold War attachments. It allows you to mix and match and create guns like this, where essentially you can have 12 different loadouts depending on your playstyle, your skill level, and how you want to use a specific weapon. Keeping in mind that the FARA, the AK-47, can definitely do these types of things too. It's just this one is better at doing it, and a lot of things that I'm talking about hold true for this, hold true for a lot of the other Cold War guns, with the exception maybe the FFAR as an SMG or sniper support, just because they're very slow now. But there are plenty of other options. Now let's go ahead and check out the final one, which is the ranged build. So for the ranged build, we're using the agency suppressor, task force, 3x optic, field agent grip, and then the 60 round mag. For some people, the recoil is going to be perfectly fine even without this field agent grip, because maybe they want faster aim down sight or strafe speed. Depending on your skill level and comfort level, you drop the field agent, you could put on the rear grip, which would be the airborne elastic. You could put on the Tiger team. You could put on the bruiser instead. You could also put on the Raider pad, and that's kind of how you would go. Keeping in mind that if you end up running this with the field agent grip, it has the same aim down sight as the AMAX, so it works perfectly well within that, with a very similar TTK, almost identical once you get beyond a certain range. So definitely try it out. Let me know what version of the XM4 is your favorite down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, learned something new, please do me a favor, hit the like button. If you're brand new and want to find your way back, just double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.